So there was a Sony State of Play this last week. A lot of people have been saying it's maybe their best State of Play.
It was good.
To date.
It was good.
I thought it was pretty good. It was jam-packed. It was like 27 minutes, 15 trailers. Yeah. It was absolutely chockers.
There was not a lot of details, but there was some exciting stuff. You know?
Yeah.
There was no PSVR 2 release date price. There was no God of War, Ragnarok, but there was some cool fucking games.
Yeah, totally. Like Spider-Man coming to PC.
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, that was maybe the worst thing about it. That was maybe... sorry, I need to get angry.
Why?
So, and finally, a PlayStation Classic game is making its way onto PC. Bloodborne? No. Spider-Man.
Oh, that's on you. No one said Bloodborne was going to be
there.
No,
but me and everybody else on Twitter was very upset that it wasn't Bloodborne, is the thing. They waited to say Spider-Man for one too many beats that there was just enough hope to build to then get immediately owned.
Bloodborne is going to be, if it happens, which I'm still not convinced it's ever going to happen, if it happens, it'll be a cold drop. It won't be, and now let's hear what Blue Point's working. Like, it won't be that, I think. I think it'll just be, bam.
Oh, I don't think it'll be Blue Point that'll do Bloodborne. I think it'll just be...
No, I know. But as an example, I don't think it's going to be that, like, thanks, Capcom, for showing us so much of your thing. We're so excited to be. Now let's get an update from one of gaming's most popular entries in the, I don't think it'll be all that faff beforehand for a Bloodborne announcement.
Maybe.
But point being, there's a number of things there. Most of them we thought were interesting, but not necessarily worth bringing up for the podcast on their own, except we both just want to talk a bit about Final Fantasy 16. And part of that for me is because you and I, Jeremy, were talking about it on Discord that morning, and you were more positive on it than I was. And I wanted to ask you more, and you were like, I'll talk to you about it more after lunch. But then we never had that conversation.
Yeah.
So the trailer's quite interesting. It's gameplay. It's proper gameplay that we've seen this time. A lot of cinematics. This game looks very, very serious. Like, very intense. Like, maybe there's going to be, like, 5 minutes of levity in this game total. Like, it looks very serious.
I don't know. They all look serious.
I mean, Final Fantasy 15 stopped looking serious as soon as you saw the car trip.
Well, Final Fantasy stopped looking serious. Sorry, Final Fantasy 15 stopped looking serious the moment that the development changed from serious to... Like, if you look at the first trailer of Final Fantasy 15, before it was called Final Fantasy 15, that was a very serious game.
Yeah, it's... Having played a bit more of Final Fantasy 12 this last week, and I was showing you before, like... I got to this big cutscene in the game, and like it was Shakespearean in writing and overlong and self-serious. Like, and then Sam was watching me do the fight in between like cutscene bits, and Sam was like, "Is anything gonna happen?" Like, Sam was like actively bored by the cutscenes and the gameplay.
Yeah,
and so like I'm getting some vibes of that here. But tell me what you were enjoying so much about the trailer.
I think that this game, from what I've seen, it looks like it knows exactly what it is. And I think that that's a good thing. Okay. Looking at the previous batch of Final Fantasy games, and I think I'm going to exclude 14 just from this side of it, because that's
so different.
It's so different, and like it went through a whole revision, right? Like a very famous revision.
Very famous failure.
Yes.
A resuscitation.
Yes. 13, 15, and 7 remake.
Mm-hmm.
They all are a little bit more whimsical. 13 not as much, but 13 has got good, like it's got light, funny character. It's got characters that are the comedic relief characters, for example, right? And it's dealing more about... Those are character-driven games, right? You know, like the plot of Final Fantasy 7, the plot of Final Fantasy 15, it's important, but it's the game about Cloud. It's the game about Noctis. It's the game about Lightning games. And this doesn't seem like that as much. This seems more about like the world and the sides, and it's maybe more like a. It's sort of. It's got a different tone to it. This does remind me more of a Final Fantasy 12, and honestly, it reminds me more of the early Final Fantasies. This feels like it's like a Final Fantasy 1 to whenever they started having
6.
characters. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that they're going to go back to that formula seemingly, because that's not one that they've been in a while. Final Fantasy 14 is that, but there are a lot of characters in that as well.
Yeah, and it's an MMO.
Yes, and I think that this is where Final Fantasy 14 falls into this conversation, is that this is lots of the same team, lots of the same leads as 14. And
a lot of those people haven't necessarily worked on core Final Fantasy games in the past.
Yeah. And I think why that is really interesting to me. Hello, Griffin.
Oh no, you don't like. Okay, that's fine. Okay.
I think why that's really interesting is that over the past, let's say, 5 years, Final Fantasy 14 has turned into something almost larger than any other Final Fantasy. Almost.
Yeah.
Like 7 maybe still tops it as like a product that people are like know of. But like 14 is now just like a whole different beast.
Yeah, totally. And like that's the nature of. Oh, sorry for this desperate cat. It's all over me. That's the nature of a successful ongoing game, right? And that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted to make when they made 14, and that's what they eventually got to.
Yeah.
It's the biggest problem with single player games for big publishers and developers these days is they don't print money like GTA Online does, like Fortnite does, like Apex does.
But I also think that it's important to know that MMOs don't do that like they used to, right? Like there were more, especially specifically subscription-based MMOs. They are almost a relic of the past at this point, and there's a handful of them that still exist, but there's way less than there ever used to be. And 14 exists in this weird resurgence of like, it turns out when you make the best version of that product, people will give like good money over bad to experience it because they want to. And they feel like it's worth it for them. Like they feel like it, every time I've canceled my subscription for now because I've been playing it for a hot minute, but like I never once felt like me paying for Final Fantasy 14 wasn't worth my money, because it just felt like such a complete product, and there was so much to do in it that it was by and large like mostly really good. So seeing that transform into a offline single player experience, which like visually looks great, as Final Fantasy games. It
does look great.
Like as Final Fantasy games by and large have looked great over the years.
Yeah, like 15 was quite impressive for the time.
15 still looks quite good. 13 still looks really good. 7 looks great, obviously.
The 7 remake, yeah, good point.
Yeah. I think that plus, the era of turn-based Final Fantasy is gone.
And it has been for a long time.
Yeah. And this being a more character action focused, fully fledged Final Fantasy game, basically that just isn't 15. Has got me.
It didn't have the troubled development.
Like it's got me excited. Like it hasn't had its name change. It hasn't had development restarted. It hasn't been, complete creative overhauls, all that stuff, right? As well as like I think Final Fantasy 15's like I enjoyed the characters there for what they were, but I think those characters in that story for me is what really never made me super click with it. And I've tried to go back to that game like 3 or 4 times, and it just I always sort of get to roughly the same point where I just fall off of it. If this game has got momentum, then like I can see myself doing like the whole thing, going the whole 9 yards. And I think the other thing is that like it's you know, it is extraordinarily over the top. There's gods and monsters, you know, fighting in the sky, and it looks like this epic battle on a grand scale, all that stuff.
Very dramatic.
And I'm watching the trailer going, I don't know what is going on at all, but I'm excited for when I do.
Interesting.
Which is not a thing I often think. You have to like you have to make me want to buy in for me to think that sort of thing. You know, like maybe a good example of that is watching watching like Lord of the Rings for the first time, and they have like, you know, the big set pieces of like, you know, world building stuff, and like I don't know why I want to know about that area, but then when I find out more about the characters that were there and stuff like that, that's how you sort of get into it. Mm-hmm. This is doing that for me. I am quite excited for this game.
Great. I'm glad. Yeah, no, the trailer's very interesting. I think the tone puts me off, honestly.
Mm.
Like, maybe it'll be fine, but it's hard for me to feel like there's much appeal in something where it's like, oh no, we're going to war again. I'm going to set the fates straight. This time, it's gonna be different. Like, you know, like that was the whole trailer was so. Like, oh, when soldiers die, we'll just make more. When buildings fall, we'll make more. The Empire will stand. Like, cool. Okay. Like, I get it. But it's very serious. And it is a bit off-putting to me. I hope it's not so much to the point that it actually gets in the way of me enjoying it when I get to playing it.
Right.
I'm also confused a lot by, like, the gameplay and the UI and stuff like that. Like, the UI is kind of this almost like futuristic style. Like, it's kind of like almost like a 13 style UI, in terms of the font styling and how it looks on screen. And like, I don't necessarily know how you do it any other way, but it reads as off to me when everything else is so medieval. It's so fantastic.
Which I think is fantasy. Which I think is interesting, because to me the UI reads like, oh, these are the Final Fantasy 14 devs.
Yeah,
because it's the same styling of UI that I was able to read anyway.
And to be clear, to be fair, it is very clear UI. Like, everything there makes a lot of sense. Like, I can kind of tell, oh, they've got different like character portraits up there. I guess maybe you can change between characters or party members, or maybe your own character can swap between like affinities of different summons, and then they enhance your abilities differently. Like, I gained all of that rather only from looking at the UI. So like, I think there's a lot there. But something I also found interesting was that there's such a mix of different combat styles. You've got your sort of, you know, taking out goons sort of combat, which looks good, fine enough. And then you've got these cinematic like boss battle style things where you've got 2 health bars across the top. And then the UI gets really simplified. You don't see all your abilities on screen and all of that. And so that looks like that'll be really intense. Like I don't know, yeah, like a fighting game, or like maybe like a Soulsborne kind of a intense fighting style. Who knows if like it'll go to like a different combat style entirely for those scenes. And then it looks like you might be fighting as like gods, you know, as these summons that are. I like they've kind of gone with the Final Fantasy 15 route of having these monsters and summons and creatures be literally like skyscrapers tall.
Yeah,
I think that's really cool. I like they're doing that again. And it seems these creatures are bonded with certain people, and so then these people will like let loose these kaiju-sized monsters.
Yeah, yeah.
And then those fights are also seeming like traditional fighting game style fights. So yeah, there's a lot of disparate things going on there that has me a little like, how many directions are we going to be being pulled here when we play?
Now, I'm gonna say something to you, and you're not gonna be super like down with like what I'm saying, but like
Okay.
this is more this more Kingdom Hearts than it is like Final Fantasy of the PS2 era. In the changing of the play style for a boss battle, the scale shift. And that's not to say that they haven't done this in the past in Final Fantasy games, but like they do this in all Kingdom Hearts games.
Right.
And it's like it's a really good way of making the fight feel the like correct on a size sense, on a scale sense.
Like the stakes of the fight match the gameplay that you're doing.
Yeah. They do that a ton in Kingdom Hearts, and especially well in 2, and pretty decently in 3, I feel. And it's a I'm excited to do that in a mainline Final Fantasy game, I think.
Okay. So, at the end of the trailer, summer 2023.
Yeah.
A, do you think it hits it? B, are you upset with the date?
I think they hit it, and being upset about dates is for babies.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like I think they hit that.
It's a year away at this stage.
Yeah, they said the other day that the game is playable from start to finish. So it's not gold. They're still polishing, but like a year's worth of polish, like they'll hit it.
That's good. That's good. And like localization and stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff. I have no reason to believe that they're not going to hit it. I've not heard a single thing about this game being in any trouble.
True. We've heard very little about this game, but that's a good point.
But like everything I have heard from people in charge, obviously they want to put out a sense of like, hey, we're doing everything right. But like, they've been really open with like, yeah, like things are good. Just things are good.
Yep.
So power to them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm very keen to see how they go, where they land, how this hits. Yeah.
You know what that means though, right? Final Fantasy VII Remake 2 comes out the year after.
If not the year after the year after.
I think we will see Final Fantasy VII Remake 2 announced whenever the 25th anniversary is later this year.
Okay.
And then we'll see gameplay of it next year after this comes out.
Okay.
To release the year after, 2024.
Maybe. Are they working on it in tandem?
Yes. Yeah, they are two different teams.
Two different teams. Okay, I didn't know that. I thought they were the same team.
As far as I'm aware, they're two different teams. I know that it's like for example, like Nomura isn't touching this game at all. He doesn't have anything to do with this.
Okay.
And the logo at the front.
Why I thought that? Why did I think that?
That logo at the front. That's the
Creative Labs 3 or something.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. But that's not the Nomura team.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know why I thought they were so linked. I thought people were going to work on 16 before 7.2 came out. Okay. Oh yeah, I could see that happening then if we see it 2024. Oh man, that's a long time. It's like 4 years since the original game. Ugh. It's like 2 years from now. Ugh. That's so sad. I almost played that game during the week, 7 Remake, to go for the platinum.
Yeah.
Well, I've already got the platinum. Go for the 100% with the DLC. Yeah. So that's our little Final Fantasy 16 check-in. Speaking of the state of play, though, what we saw there, well, like we said at the start, we didn't see any dates or hardware hands-on or anything like that. But we did see 3 or 4 or 5? What did we saw? 4, I think. 4 or 5 games announced to have.
Sorry, just really quick. I wanted to Google what the Square Enix Creative Business Unit 3 was.
Creative Business Unit.
Yeah, right. They've got so Square Enix have 4 creative business units. Creative Business Unit 1 is the Kingdom Hearts. There's different divisions inside of it, but Division 1 does mainline single player Final Fantasy games such as Final Fantasy 13, 7 Remake. Business Division 3 does the Kingdom Hearts games and the Final Fantasy spin-offs, World Ends With You. And Business Division 4, I don't know where Business Division 2 is.
Honestly, yeah.
Does Dissidia Theatre Rhythm games. Creative Business Unit 2 does Dragon Quest, Nier, Bravely series, Octopath. And then Creative Business Unit 3 focuses primarily on MMORPGs. Final Fantasy 14, which is the same unit as 16.
Yes.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
I've heard some talk that the last Final Fantasy 14 expansion didn't hit as good as the last ones have. I wonder if that's because they were spread.
Maybe. And then Creative Business Unit 4 does the Mana series and a couple other random stuff. Remasters, ports of different franchises, Schoolgirl Strikers.
It's fascinating. Nintendo acts similarly with their game development structure, right? Where they've got like Nintendo Team 1 and 2 and 3. Like,
But these are called Creative Business Unit 4, which inside of it is Business Division 10, for example.
Whatever, Square Enix.
Look, it's probably a pretty easy internally to then separate things. That's funny.
Yeah. So, at this state of play, we saw about 4 or 5